try to come to life. Jump in the shower and the blood starts pumping. Out on the streets, the traffic starts jumping with folks like me on the job from 9 to 5. Working 9 to 5. What a way to make a living. Headaches passing by. It's all taking and no giving. They just use your mind and they never give you credit. It's enough that drives you crazy and you let it. 9 to 5.
Hello and welcome back to Office Hours Live.
Woo! Yeah!
You know, you have 2 weeks. This is a special 2 week before the worst election day and the worst election in American history. Has there ever been a worse election? Really, I just feel like we've been all swimming in a sewer for 6 months at least. It was a pretty good election, at least the Democratic primary. When Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton were debating, those debates were substantive. We were talking about issues. But since then, it's all been about personality and character and temperament. And I don't know about you, but I can't wait for this election to be finished. But by the way, I'm live and you're live and we're all live, and I hope you tell others to share right now because there's an opportunity for us to talk about stuff. I'm going to take your questions in a little while. I also want to mention, Dolly Parton, are you still out there? You haven't called. You know, I do this and I love to do this, but I really want, Dolly, please just give me a call. You know, you and I go way back. We do. 1946. We were both born in... Here's something you may not... Here's a trivial pursuit. Who was born in 1946? Well, not only Dolly Parton and me and Cher, but also Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Donald Trump. I mean, anybody who's everybody who's anybody was born in 1946. So, Dolly, please call in. You can call in during this broadcast, by the way. And it would be great to talk to you. All right, today we're going to talk about, and I want to talk about, it's World Series tonight. I'm not going to talk about the World Series unless you want to talk about the World Series, but I want to tell you the Cubs have not won a World Series since 1918. And so it's about time. I know a lot of you Cleveland people, you want Cleveland to win, but I'm rooting for the Cubs because I am always rooting for the underdog. You understand that? This is what this is about. This is what we are about. But today, I decided I'm not going to talk about the election unless you want to talk about the election, because I'm sick and tired of the election. I want to talk about 3 things. One, and they all have to do with power, all right? One has to do with health insurance on the Affordable Care Act exchanges going up 22 to 25% next year. The second has to do with the Dakota Access Pipeline versus the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and also the third is AT&T buying Time Warner. These are all about power, all right? Make sure you understand it's about power. With regard to health insurance and the ACA, the background story here is that 3 of the biggest private for-profit insurance companies in America have basically checked out. They said that they are pulling back from the health exchanges. And that is United Healthcare and Humana and also Aetna. And once those big insurance companies pull back, then there's less and less choice. That means prices are going to have to go up. Not only prices and premiums going up, but also you've got co-payments and deductibles going up. Look, here is the important thing to keep in mind. Because as these big private for-profit health insurance companies get bigger and bigger, and they are getting bigger, and they are dominating their markets, they are becoming monopolies, they are gobbling up other private health insurance companies, then they have more power politically to call the shots. They start exiting from the Affordable Care Act, and it makes huge economic and political turmoil. They know that, and we are on the road. Not only do we have to have a public option added to these exchanges, a public option into a kind of Medicare for all, because otherwise a lot of these exchanges under the Affordable Care Act, you've got basically one insurer left, and that one insurer is not going to be able to do very much, and that one insurer is going to probably pull out because of the enormous pressures on that one insurer. But listen, this is ultimately going to be a choice. I can't tell you whether it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but as the big private for-profit health insurers continue to consolidate, we are going to have a choice between either a private for-profit expensive health insurance monopoly or a government-run single-payer system like every other advanced country does. And we ought to be preparing right now for the latter, because unless we do, the former, that is these big giant for-profit insurance companies, are going to continue to consolidate and charge more and more and more and more. And you and I, regardless of the Affordable Care Act, are going to be spending more and more and more. Do you get it? That's really the choice. That's what's going on behind here. So again, the real choice is all about real choice, and ultimately we are going to have to have a single payer system. Single payer, and we want a single payer. Let's hear it for a single payer system.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, just to shift gears here, but again, the theme is power. The theme is corporate power. You look here at the Dakota Access Pipeline. This is a big deal. I mean, not only, can you imagine what would happen if a private for-profit pipeline company wanted to put their pipeline through Arlington National Cemetery? I mean, you know, there would be a public outrage and outcry, and it would be it wouldn't even, they would never even get permission to do it. They couldn't even begin to do it. Well, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, this is a burial ground. This is sacred territory for that tribe. It also has environmental implications. And you have the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of the Interior. What they ought to be doing right now is saying to this private Dakota Access Pipeline Company, you can't do this. This is public land. You don't have eminent domain for a private for-profit company. And you've got these Native Americans that have a claim. You know, the government did not even have adequate consultation with these Native American tribes. This is a big deal, and it's not being reported, and it should be reported. A lot of people, you know, Amy Goodman was arrested, and Jill Stein was arrested, and Amy Goodman actually, I mean, they are out because the charges couldn't be maintained. But this is not even being reported on the major media. This is one of the major protests and major confrontations between Native Americans and corporate America. And, you know, a lot of people need to be out there. I'm just drawing people, you and me and a lot of other people. And we need to be making sure that corporate America understands that it cannot just simply use its political power with the government to do anything it wants, particularly when it is dealing with very sensitive grounds that have a kind of sacredness about them. All right, number 3 in our examples of corporate power, AT&T announces for $85 billion it is buying Time Warner. This has got to be stopped. We have antitrust. We, the federal government, under the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission, have authority to stop this acquisition. This acquisition will reduce competition in one of the most sensitive areas of our economy, and that is telecommunications, content, and also the distribution, the providing of telecommunications. I mean, AT&T is already giant. It is huge. This is AT&T. And you have Time Warner. Time Warner, not only does it have HBO, but very importantly, it also owns CNN. I mean, can you imagine, for example, AT&T, all sorts of issues of privacy, individual privacy, technology, international trade. I mean, do you really want one of our major carriers to buy one of our major content providers. I mean, not only is there a problem in competitive terms, in terms of what happens if AT&T favors Time Warner over all other competitors of Time Warner, but also you've got the possibility of conflict of interest in terms of the content that Time Warner is providing. So this should be stopped. And the antitrust division should be going to court. It should be saying, in effect, this violates the antitrust laws as we know it. And by the way, theme of today, if there is a theme, is that not only do you have big corporate power, but you also have corporate power that is concentrating. Whether we're talking about pipelines and energy, or we're talking about health insurance, or we're talking about AT&T and Time Warner, we have seen over the last 20 years a huge wave of consolidation of corporate power, and the antitrust laws. Actually, the first antitrust law was 1890, the Sherman antitrust laws. We've got to make sure that those are enforced. The Obama administration has been, in my view, fairly lackadaisical. It has not really enforced the antitrust laws as hard and as vigorously as they need to be enforced. And hopefully the next administration, Hillary, are you listening to me, Hillary Clinton? The next administration, we want very strong antitrust enforcement. Because this is bad for the economy, and by the way, it's also bad for politics, because the more concentrated you get these big companies and these industries, the more political power they have. And that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, a vicious cycle that we are already suffering from. Do you get me? Okay, let's go to your questions. See, this beginning part of our discussion, the first 15 minutes, is an opportunity for me to just let off steam. I understand Donald Trump started his own half-hour television, Facebook Live program, didn't he? But he can't hold a candle to us, right? Because we're talking substance. We're talking about things you ought to know, things that you have not got enough media attention. Things that really ought to be part of any informed citizen's vocabulary and ought to be talked about right now. And I don't know what he's talking about. He's talking about just the opposite. Thomas Stafford, why don't corporations get behind the idea of a single payer? Well, it's because a lot of money is to be made by private for-profit health insurers, and they don't want a single payer. In fact, if anything, the whole history, right back to when we first began talking seriously about public single-payer health insurance, first time it came up was in the New Deal of the 1930s, and you had the entire American Medical Association, all of the hospitals, the entire medical establishment saying, don't you dare put a single payer in the New Deal, in Social Security, or in any of the New Deal legislation. And then Harry Truman tried to do it, and then John F. Kennedy, and we've had a series of presidents trying to move toward a single-payer system, and private industry won't allow it. We're getting to the point, by the way, I'm going to take your next question, but I just want to finish this thought, because once I get started particularly about healthcare, we're up to 18% of the entire U.S. economy is spent on healthcare, more than, on a per person basis, more than any other country spends. Advanced country spends on healthcare, and yet we have the worst record in terms of lifespans, infant mortality among all industrialized nations. So we're spending more and getting less back. Hello? Stacy Kent, I'd like to hear your advice on how we communicate with each other in these last 2 weeks. Do we give up with them and hope for the best, or do we continue to pursue a conversation and try to bring them to their senses? Stacy, I assume when you're talking about them, you're talking about Trump followers. And look, in my experience, particularly over the last couple of months, the people who are definitely decided to vote for Donald Trump, I have a hard time. I can't get through. But there's still a lot of people wavering out there. There are people who are trying to decide between Trump and Hillary, or Trump and Gary Johnson. And what I think we all need to do, and we're going to need to do this even more after the election, is reach out to people who disagree with us. I mean, I've said this and I say this over and over to my students. The best way of learning anything is to talk to people who disagree with you. It forces us to clarify our arguments, to re-examine what we believe. And I think that's even the case. I know it's hard, but it's even the case right now across party lines. Next question is from Carolyn Wynn. Carolyn Wynn. I understand that we should listen to the thoughts of those who hold different views. Carolyn, you were right in front of me there. Are these people in the Conservative Party that you would, in the Conservative Party, Carol, you're talking about Republicans, right? Or unless you are, what, are you from a different country, Carolyn? In the Conservative Party, are there people in the Conservative Party that you would recommend to hear intelligent and thoughtful ideas? Well, there are some people. I was debating last week, or maybe a week and a half ago, Charles Krauthammer. Now, he is a Fox News regular. I disagree with a lot of what he says, but he's intelligent. He's at least a thoughtful person. Bill Kristol, the editor of the Weekly Standard, also a Republican, somebody who I disagree with about almost everything, but I respect him, and when we talk, we actually have substantive conversations. Another one a fellow who I'm going to be seeing tonight for dinner, former Senator Alan K. Simpson, and his wife. I and my wife are going to be seeing Alan Simpson and his wife for dinner. You know, there is the possibility of a conversation. And I like Alan Simpson. Again, we disagree on a lot of stuff. Kirk Stewart. If no votes are cast, do we get to keep Obama for another 4 years? I wish we could. Thomas Redling. Tom Hayden just died. I hear that you knew him. Can you tell us a little about him? Yes, Tom Hayden was a friend, Thomas Redling, and I was very, very sad to hear about his death. And you may not know, a lot of people don't know the history, and I don't have time to get into the details, just that Tom Hayden was one of the leaders in the 1960s of what we knew as the New Left. He was the chief author of the Port Huron Statement of 1962, which was a foundation stone, both for civil rights and for the anti-Vietnam War movement, and for a lot of New Left thinking. If you have a chance, Google it. Look at the Port Huron Statement. Tom Hayden was arrested in Chicago in 1968, one of the Chicago Seven. He was a very courageous, imaginative organizer. He went to New Jersey, Jersey City, spent years there organizing tenants against slumlords. And then he spent 18 years. He was both an activist outside government and an activist inside government. Spent 18 years in the California Assembly and the Senate, working very, very hard. I had enormous respect for him, and I will miss him very much, as we all should. Joanne Piper, I hope you continue this after the election is over. This being what we're doing now. It's helpful to many of us when you break down politics and policies and give us your perspective of how it affects all of us. Thank you, Joanne, and I think we will continue. Terry Callahan, how effective do you think Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren will be pushing President Hillary Clinton? Terry, you were being optimistic, but I think reasonably optimistic. President Hillary Clinton in a progressive direction. Well, ordinarily, Terry, if it were just Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, 2 senators out of 100 senators, I would say they would not have very much influence. But both of them have a huge following. And that is really more and more of the progressive base of the Democratic Party. Anybody who becomes president, the day after they become president, this is going to be true of Hillary Clinton, and perish the thought, Donald Trump, it would be true, they begin thinking about re-election. Now, they're thinking about re-election because the one measure we have of a successful presidency is being re-elected. Once you are re-elected, once you have 8 years, you have a chapter in a history book. Once you're re-elected, you have an era that is named after you. If you do not get re-elected, you are considered, by definition, a failure. And so Hillary Clinton is going to be looking at the year 2020. And that means that progressives, through people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, could have a great deal of power in terms of making sure that Hillary Clinton knows she can't take progressives for granted, and that she, through those two and through other senators, Jeff Merkley is another one, and there are others, really moves and fulfills her obligations, what she said already about the minimum wage, about free college tuition, about many other things. Gerald Kenyon, if the Senate goes Democratic, what committee will Bernie run, if any, and what are the consequences? Gerald, I believe that if the Senate becomes Democratic, and it looks very, very likely now, we only need 4 Senate votes to flip, and I think we are going to get that. I may be being a little bit optimistic, but I think, and some of the races are very close, and we have put up some information about those close Senate races on this page. Be sure to see those. But I think Bernie is likely to get, he's going to have a little bit of a choice, either the Senate Budget Committee or the Senate Committee on Labor, Education, and Health. I hope he takes the latter. Now, you may think, well, budget is a big deal. No, the Health, Education, Labor Committee is really a much more substantive committee. It deals with some of the most important issues that are going to be before the next Congress, and that's where we need Bernie. Carol Ann Parker, why do you believe Hillary needs a landslide victory? Why can't we cast a protest vote against the DNC if we live in a solid red or blue state? Won't a landslide allow her to ignore progressives? Carol Ann Parker, first of all, you obviously have a right to do exactly what you want. I mean, I'm not going to be so presumptuous as to tell you what to do. But I do think, particularly with Donald Trump creating this false, made-up narrative about a fixed election, the more votes Hillary Clinton has, the more of a landslide victory she gets, the easier it will be for her to say that Donald Trump is full of baloney. And it also gives her more legitimacy. Now, you're concerned that if she gets a landslide, she can ignore her progressive base. No, I don't think she can. I don't think she will. Again, for the very reason I said before, she's going to be looking at 2020, and a lot of progressives are going to make it very clear to her that we are going to hold her accountable. Christy Silvio, I'm deeply distressed that there is no dialogue on education this election year. How do you think we can borrow from other countries' education models to improve our own? Christine, a big, big question. I would say my priorities for education are early childhood education. That has been proven to have the biggest impact. I'm talking about kids between the ages of 0 and 5 years old, before they even go to school. We also obviously have got to spend more. I mean, I'm not saying money is everything, but you can't have better schools unless you at least have more resources to begin with. It's a necessary, if not sufficient, condition, and that's on K through 12. A lot of our poor schools don't have a tax base that allows them to have good teachers and good facilities. And we've got to move toward free public college, public university tuition. And all of this, these are all public investments. What bothers me is this idea that somehow education is a private investment. This is a public good. Sterling Schreiber II. That's pretty impressive, Sterling Schreiber II. Can you talk about the need, or lack thereof, for a Federal Reserve audit? It is in the GOP platform, and something some progressives have also supported. Sterling, I know a lot of people talk about a Federal Reserve audit. Frankly, I don't know exactly what that means. Do you want more transparency in the Federal Reserve? Yes, I think it's probably a good idea that we know a little bit more about the accounting system inside the Federal Reserve in terms of what kind of money the Federal Reserve is actually holding and what it's doing with that money. I think it's also very, very useful to know exactly how every governor of the Federal Reserve gets there and what the internal politics are. In my book, there are too many bankers on the Federal Reserve, and that is not just and should not just be a preserve of the bankers. We've got to keep interest rates low now, because having more jobs is a bigger necessity than avoiding inflation, in my view. Steve Slocum. Could individual states pass laws that allocate electors according to votes? In other words, Steve, you're saying, could, instead of a winner-take-all system where the majority of votes in a state, the candidate that gets the majority of the vote gets all the electors, could a state decide, for example, that it's going to allocate electors proportional to the votes that the candidates get? The answer is yes, by the way. In fact, there are two states that already do this, Maine and Nebraska. There is no reason that every other state could not do exactly the same. And the big advantage is that if every state allocated electors based upon the percentage of votes that each candidate gets, that means that a third party would have a chance. Right now, third parties cannot break in. Third parties cannot get electoral votes unless you get, I mean, the last president, here's a quickie quiz. Ready for this? The last presidential candidate, third party, to get any electoral votes. Do you know what it is? Huh? Anybody? Anybody? Class? Put up your hands. Let me see. Anybody? George Wallace, 1968. Robert Harris Jr., how sure are we that polls are real indicators? They tell us to expect a landslide, and I assume you're talking about for Hillary Clinton, but then I drive to work and it's an ocean of Trump signs. Robert Harris, you are right to be a little bit concerned because polls don't tell us who's going to vote. They don't tell us very much about the vacillation, that is how many people between now and election day, even if they haven't yet voted, how many people might change their minds. And the polls also don't tell us something else, and that is how many people are telling pollsters one thing and actually planning to do something else. There may be a lot of people out there who are a little bit embarrassed to say they're going to vote for Trump. We saw this with Brexit in Britain. We also saw this in Colombia with regard to the agreement with the FARC. Pollsters assumed, both with regard to Brexit and FARC, because most people said they were going to vote in, they said they would not vote for Brexit. They said they would vote for FARC, and in fact, they did just the opposite. So there is a little bit of concern about what and how accurate those polls are. This is our last question already. How can it be? Haven't we just begun? All right, last question. Susan Johnson, how the hell do we heal this country after the election? Susan, a great question, and I do believe that we all have a responsibility. I'm talking to you, Susan, and I'm talking to you, everybody else. We have a responsibility, all of us, to help heal this nation. There is no way that we can go forward. I'm not talking about just the next president. I'm talking about, and I'm not talking just about the next Senate or the next House of Representatives. There's no way that we can make progress on the issues that have to be dealt with. Issues of widening inequality, child poverty, issues of stagnant wages, issues of more and more wealth and income going to the top, issues of climate change, issues that really have got to be, issues of the militarization of our police, and the problem of what's happened to black men in the society, issues having to do with a war, a permanent war system that we are engaged in. These are big deals. This election has almost completely avoided all of these issues. There's no way we can actually make progress on these issues that must be addressed unless we begin to come together and have constructive conversations around all of these. So it starts with you. It starts with you getting out of your bubble, talking to people, as I said 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, who disagree with you, having courage to actually initiate that kind of conversation. And just beginning the process of pulling people together. We're never going to agree on everything, obviously, but the way we disagree has got to be civilly, with respect. Just one final word on this. The generation of the 1950s and 60s who came of age in the Depression and World War II, they understood something that we don't understand as well. They understood that we're all in the same boat, that we really do, literally, succeed or fail together. During the Depression and during World War II, we understood our own interdependency in a way that we have not profoundly understood that interdependency since then. If you are wealthy in this country, you would do better with a smaller share of an economy that's growing because the middle class is growing. If you are wealthy in this country, you would do better with a smaller share of an economy and a society that is not at loggerheads, because everybody is more stressed and at work everybody is kind of competing for a shrinking share of the pie. All of us have a stake in coming together. And on that upbeat note, let me very, very quickly thank two wonderful, wonderful people behind that camera, Zoe Umlaut Beck, and also Yael Bridge. Yael is back with us today. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.